At 9 a.m., on a cold March morning in Paris, a woman climbs a narrow staircase with a bag full of documents, a thermos of coffee, and a mind full of unfinished battles. She has exactly 10 minutes until her first meeting. 10 minutes until the phones start ringing, until new cables from South Africa arrive, until she must decide which threat to answer first. What she doesn't know is that in those same 10 minutes, someone else is climbing toward her from the shadows, a rival she will never meet, a competitor whose only goal is to reach her before she can speak again. 3 bullets are already waiting in a chamber. The clock is ticking down on Dulcie September, and to understand why someone is racing to silence a schoolteacher from a small South African town, we have to go back to the beginning. The story starts far from Paris, in the wine country of the Cape, in the town of Paarl, in 1935. Imagine the heat pressing down on dust roads, the smell of fermenting grapes drifting from whitewashed farms that a girl like Dulcie is never allowed to own. She is born into a world where a line on a government file decides who you are allowed to love, where you are allowed to live, what you are allowed to dream. On paper, she is classified as colored, neither white nor black, trapped in a cruel in-between that the apartheid architects will soon weaponize. At home, the adults speak in lowered voices about police, about passes, about new laws coming. For a child, the first lesson isn't the alphabet, it's fear, and how to breathe around it without letting it choke you. But Dulcie is stubborn from the start. She stares too long, asks too much. In a cramped classroom, wooden desks scarred by years of names carved into them, she sits up straighter than the others. The teachers are underpaid, exhausted, but they spot the fire in her. Books become her escape route, their pages a secret tunnel under the high, invisible walls of racial hierarchy. While other children memorize dates and names, Dulcie studies the gaps, the silences in the stories they're told. Why are some heroes missing? Why is suffering brushed aside as unrest? Already, there is an opponent circling her life. Not a single person, but a system, an invisible competitor that wants to reach her mind before she can form her own questions, that wants to teach her obedience before she discovers resistance. Outside the schoolyard, the landscape carries its own lessons. She sees fields where her people pick grapes they will never taste as expensive wine. She watches white children stroll down the main road without glancing at whites-only signs, while her neighbors step off the sidewalk, heads down, bodies bent by generations of enforced humility. When the National Party comes to power in 1948 and formal apartheid is born, Dulcie is 13. She doesn't yet know the word apartheid will become infamous worldwide, but she feels it tightening, like a noose. New notices appear, new rules are barked out, new police uniforms patrol the streets. Every year, her rival, the apartheid state, grows more confident, more ruthless, and more organized. Dulcie chooses the most dangerous future available to a young woman like her. She decides to become a teacher. To the authorities, that seems harmless enough. Let her instruct colored children according to the new Bantu education rules, they think. Let her pass on the lessons of obedience. But Dulcie has a different plan. She studies hard, pushing past the quiet insults, the lowered expectations, the way instructors sigh when someone like her dares to excel. In lecture halls and shared rooms, she finds other young people who are beginning to question everything. They talk late into the night about new laws, about forced removals, about the rising tide of resistance. The state, meanwhile, is also studying. Its police force and special branch are learning the techniques of surveillance, infiltration, torture. While Dulcie trains to shape minds, her enemy trains to break them. When she finally stands at the front of her own classroom, chalk in hand, she feels the weight of possibility. 50 pairs of eyes look back at her, belonging to children whose futures have already been discounted by the government. The curriculum in her hands is a weapon aimed at their confidence, designed to teach them that they are destined only for labor, for service, for silence. Dulcie quietly turns that weapon around. She introduces her students to stories of Africa that are not in the official books. She encourages questions, not obedience. She insists on dignity, on pride, on the outrageous idea that these children have a right to more than the state is willing to give. In a country where words have sent people to prison, a lesson about history becomes a subversive act. The classroom, small and bare, becomes her first battleground. Then comes 1960, and with it, a turning point so violent it shakes young Dulcie to her core. On a March day in Sharpeville, hundreds of kilometers away, police open fire on unarmed protesters demonstrating against past laws. 69 people are killed, many of them shot in the back as they try to flee. Their blood stains dust roads like the ones Dulcie grew up on. Photographs of bodies face down on the ground, of women crying over lifeless forms, leak into newspapers around the world. In Paarl, the news arrives like a blow. For her, it is more than an atrocity. It is a revelation. The competitor she faces is no longer abstract. The state is telling her, with bullets, that petitions and polite requests for change will be met with massacre. The time for cautious hope is over. In the aftermath of Sharpeville, the government declares a state of emergency. Leaders are arrested, organizations banned, meetings driven underground. It is in this atmosphere of fear and urgency that Dulcie crosses a line she can never uncross. She moves from quiet defiance in the classroom to organized political resistance. She begins to mingle with members of small, radical groups, people who believe that words alone will not bring down a regime that fires live ammunition into crowds. She gravitates toward the African People's Democratic Union of Southern Africa, APDUSA, and later to a clandestine formation called the National Liberation Front. In back rooms with curtains drawn, over cups of weak tea and whispered arguments, she listens, learns, and eventually speaks. Each meeting is a race against time. The longer they talk, the higher the risk that someone is listening from outside. For the apartheid state, this is intolerable. If teachers like Dulcie become organizers, if classrooms become seedbeds of resistance, the carefully engineered hierarchy begins to crack. Somewhere in a police office, a file is started with her name on it. Reports trickle in. Associates with known radicals, attends gatherings. Possibly involved in distributing banned literature, her life becomes a contest between two growing forces. On one side, her network of comrades, scattered across townships and campuses, passing leaflets under doors, planning campaigns by candlelight. On the other side, an expanding security apparatus that wants to know what she will say before she says it, where she will go before she leaves, who she will meet before they even shake hands. Dulcie may never see the faces of the men writing in that file, but their pens are always moving, trying to stay one step ahead. She also knows, better than anyone, that time is not on their side. New laws give the police power to detain people without trial for longer and longer periods. Torture stories begin to circulate. Screams in police basements. Bodies returned to families bearing accidental injuries. People disappear. The stakes rise with each new regulation, each new amendment designed to choke off any space for dissent. Every night before a meeting, Dulcie must ask herself if she will make it back to her bed, or if this is the night a van door slams behind her. Every leaflet she folds, every whisper she passes, feels like a small victory stolen from a giant that is waking up angry. By the early 1960s, the struggle and the repression lock into a deadly rhythm. Resistance groups talk of sabotage, of striking at the infrastructure of apartheid, rather than simply shouting at its walls. Dulcie, The schoolteacher, who once believed that knowledge alone could unmake injustice, finds herself weighing heavier choices. Can she justify stronger actions when peaceful protest has been met with massacres? Is she willing to risk not just her job and her freedom, but the safety of her family? The competitor she faces, the South African state, has made its answer clear. It will do anything to maintain power. For Dulcie, the question becomes whether she can live with doing anything less. Meanwhile, the net tightens. Police raids become more frequent. Dawn knocks on doors, send panic through neighborhoods. Friends are taken in for questioning and come back hollow-eyed, if they come back at all. One evening, as she corrects school notebooks, Dulcie hears that a comrade she met only days ago has been arrested. Their last meeting flashes in her mind. The shared joke, the planned leaflet drop, the unspoken understanding that they may never see each other again. In that moment, the rivalry between her and the security forces becomes painfully personal. They are taking her people one by one, trying to shatter the network she has woven, trying to frighten her into silence. Each arrest is like a move on a chessboard, and the state believes it is already several steps ahead. Then comes the moment when the race between them reaches her own doorstep. It is early morning, the sky just beginning to lighten, when the quiet street outside her home fills with the low growl of engines. Vans roll to a stop, boots crunch on gravel. Somewhere, a neighbor's curtain twitches and then falls still. Inside, Dulcie freezes, listening. The knock on her door is not loud, but it carries the weight of all the laws the regime has passed, all the bullets it has fired, all the files it has compiled. On one side of that door stands a woman who has chosen to fight with the only tools she has ever known: her mind, her voice, her courage. On the other side stand men who believe they can crush all of that before breakfast. She has seconds, not minutes, to decide what to do: to hide, to run, to open the door and face what is waiting. The competitor she has felt breathing down her neck for years has finally caught up, and as her hand reaches for the handle, Dulcie September's life, shaped by a childhood under segregation and a youth forged in resistance, is about to turn onto a path from which there will be no easy return. In spy films, the raid always happens at midnight. The sirens scream, the doors splinter, everything explodes into chaos. In real life, when the security branch comes for Dulcie September, the street is still half asleep. The kettle on her stove has just started to whisper, and the loudest sound in the house is her own heartbeat. For half a second, she tells herself it could be a neighbor, a delivery, anything but what she has been expecting for months. But the knock is too calm, too deliberate. It is the sound of people who already believe they have won. She has seconds, not minutes. The classroom-trained part of her brain counts them automatically. 1, she puts down her pen. 2, she thinks of the documents hidden in the house, the names, the addresses. 3, she remembers the faces of her students, the way they looked at her when she spoke of justice as if it were a possible future, not a forbidden word. 4, the knock comes again, not louder, just more certain. On the other side of the door stands the competitor she has been racing in the dark for years, the apartheid state in the shape of a few men with warrants and guns and the law behind them. She can't outrun them now. She can only choose how to meet them. When she opens the door, the first thing that enters is the cold air, then the boots, then the eyes. They sweep past her, measuring everything, searching for evidence, for weakness, for fear. One officer, in a plain suit that tries and fails to look ordinary, barely glances at her. His gaze moves straight to the shelves, to the desk, to the drawers. He knows exactly what he's here to find. He has spent months reading reports with her name on them. In his mind, this is not a beginning. It is the end of a hunt. For him, Dulcie is a file number, a risk to be neutralized before she can influence more minds. For her, he is a reminder that every leaflet passed, every meeting attended, has been a move in a game she cannot afford to lose. They turn the house inside out. Books hit the floor. Mattress stuffing spills like wounded flesh. A box of chalk from her classroom rolls under the table, white sticks scattering like tiny bones. On the kitchen counter, the kettle clicks off, unheard. When they do find what they are looking for, banned pamphlets, duplicated by hand, notes from meetings, a small package of materials the state will call explosives. The man in the plain suit still doesn't look at her. He doesn't need to. In his mind, the case is already complete. The teacher has crossed the line from agitator to saboteur. Now the clock starts ticking on a different kind of race. How quickly they can break her before her comrades can adapt, before her story can inspire others. At the station, time loses its usual shape. Days and nights blur into a single, harsh light that never quite goes off. The law now allows the police to hold people like her for 90 days without trial, then another 90, and another, each period, stacked like bricks in a wall that has no visible end. In an interrogation room that smells of sweat and stale smoke, the officers try to turn hours into weapons. "You have 48 hours to think carefully," one of them tells her, tapping a file with her name on it. After that, we stop asking nicely. They lay out photographs of people she knows, some she barely remembers, and some she has never seen. Every image is a question. Every silence is marked down as defiance. Dulcie sits upright, hands in her lap, a posture learned from years of teaching, now repurposed as armor. She answers little, says nothing about others, refuses to give them a chain of names they can follow into the townships. The men grow impatient. They raise their voices, slam their fists, send her back to a bare cell where the walls feel closer every day. They want her to understand that they have all the time in the world, that the sun will rise and set whether she talks or not. But she knows something they don't. Every minute she keeps her mouth shut is a minute her comrades stay free, a minute the machine, on their side, works without the information it needs. For them, time is a weapon. For her, endurance is a counterattack. The trial, when it comes, is more theater than justice. In a high-ceilinged courtroom that smells of polished wood and stale power, the charges are read out in language heavy with menace. Possession of explosives, membership in an illegal organization, conspiracy to commit sabotage. The words hang in the air like smoke, designed less to describe what she has actually done than to send a message. In the gallery, a few supporters sit in rigid silence, forbidden from turning the proceedings into a rally. Outside, police keep curious onlookers at bay. Inside, the judge looks down at Dulcie over his glasses with the faint, bored disdain of a man who believes the outcome was decided long before the first witness took the stand. The evidence is thin, stretched to breaking point by imagination and fear. A handful of documents, some printed material, traces of chemicals that could be used to make an explosive device. The state cannot show buildings destroyed, cannot produce photographs of her planting bombs, but it doesn't need to. Under the Sabotage Act, intention is enough. The idea of resistance itself is treated as a crime. When she refuses to plead guilty, when she stands in the dock and declares that the real violence is the system she has spent her life opposing, the officials watching her are not impressed. They are irritated. In their world, teachers are supposed to be instruments of obedience, not authors of defiance. The sentence is delivered in clipped, precise tones. 5 years in prison. The words land on her like cold water. 5 years, 60 months, over 1,800 days. For the men in black robes, it is a number, a calculated portion of life to be removed. For her, it is a slice of time that could have been spent in classrooms, in meetings, on the streets, now to be spent behind walls. As she is led away, she has no way of knowing how those years will reshape her, or how the rival she faces will continue to evolve while she is locked up. She just knows that the race has entered a new phase, one where her movements are tightly controlled, but the struggle inside her refuses to sit still. Prison in South Africa is designed not just to confine bodies, but to crush spirits. The first nights are the hardest. Metal bunks, thin blankets that never quite defeat the cold, a constant hum of distant voices and closing gates. The fluorescent lights buzz like angry insects. Guards patrol with the casual cruelty of people who believe the people in these cells have fallen off the edge of the human map. For women prisoners, the indignities stack up quickly. Strip searches, shouted orders, the assumption that they are brittle, easy to break. The system sees them as an anomaly. Women who refuse to be quiet, too dangerous to leave at home, too stubborn to be scared into submission. But Dulcie has spent her life in under-resourced schools, in overcrowded classrooms, in communities where people have learned to create fragments of dignity out of almost nothing. She recognizes the rhythms of institutional life, the boredom, the small rules, the unofficial hierarchies, and she recognizes something else. The possibility that this place, too, can become a site of resistance. She begins to talk quietly to other prisoners, sharing news, sharing stories. She listens to their accounts of arrest, of torture, of families left without support. The teacher in her does not retire. It simply changes its syllabus. Here, the lessons are about survival, about keeping a sense of self alive in a system designed to erase it. The authorities notice, they always notice. Prison officers, instructed by the same security branch that hunted her on the outside, watch Dulcie closely. They report that she influences other inmates, that she encourages political discussion, that her presence makes discipline more difficult. The man in the plain suit, or someone much like him, reads these reports in a distant office and frowns. Even in a locked cell, she is still in motion, still competing for hearts and minds against a state that wants complete silence. Occasionally, as punishment, she is placed in isolation, a tiny world of 4 walls, a bed, and her own thoughts. The intention is to bend her, to persuade her that resistance is not worth the personal cost. Instead, isolation becomes a brutal kind of classroom, a place where she rewrites the lesson plan of her life. In the long hours with no books and no company, she thinks about what brought her here, about the thin line between teaching and organizing. Between patience and urgency, she realizes something that will shape everything she does afterward. The state controls space, but it fears time. Every year in prison creates more ex-political prisoners with stories to tell, more martyrs to inspire, more witnesses to expose the system's cruelty. If she survives, her years behind bars will not be a blank gap in her life. They will be evidence. When the gates finally open for her in 1969 and the sun hits her face without a bar in front of it, freedom arrives with a hook. She doesn't step into an open world. She steps into a larger, more cleverly constructed cage. A banning order is read out to her in cool, bureaucratic language. She is forbidden to attend gatherings, forbidden to be quoted, forbidden to teach, forbidden to move beyond strictly defined boundaries without permission. Her world shrinks to a small monitored map. Reporting to the police becomes a part-time job. Every week, at set times, she must present herself at the station, a living tick box on someone's checklist. Miss an appointment, and the state will collect its penalty. The cruelty is almost elegant. The competitor she faces has changed tactics. Where once it used open violence, now it relies on suffocation. Banning is a way of wasting an activist's time, of turning every day into an administrative puzzle. If she wants to visit family, she must apply in advance. If she wants to attend a funeral, she must request special permission. Every activity has a deadline, a form, a risk. The message is clear. We decide how you spend your minutes and hours. We will tie you up in such tight knots of regulation that you will have no energy left for politics. Many people, broken by prison and worn down by constant supervision, choose the safest path. They withdraw. They live quietly. They hope the state will eventually lose interest. Dulcie tries, for a while, to live within the lines they have drawn, if only to regain her strength. She finds small jobs, keeps in touch with family, walks carefully along the edges of the map assigned to her. But the suffering she witnessed in prison and the stories that reach her ears from the townships make quiet withdrawal impossible. Word of new uprisings, new arrests, new deaths filters into her restricted world. Each report is like a knock on the door of her conscience. She begins discreetly to support families of political prisoners, to help organize help for those left behind. A visit to bring food to a comrade's mother becomes in her hands a lesson, a conversation, a reminder that no one is truly alone. All the while, unknown to her in detail, but felt in the prickle at the back of her neck, the rival hunts. Informers sit in church pews, in queues at the post office, on street corners. A friendly stranger asks one question too many. A neighbor's casual remark appears, word for word, in a police file. Somewhere, a particular officer tracks her movements, notes who she greets, who she lingers with. To him, this is a competition of patience. He doesn't need to arrest her again immediately. He just needs to wait for her to slip, to attend a meeting, to sign her name to something. He is betting that time will wear her down. She, meanwhile, is learning that time can also sharpen a person, strip away fear until only purpose remains. The twist comes not with a dramatic raid, but with an opportunity. By the early 1970s, the struggle against apartheid is increasingly international. News of massacres and torture chambers has seeped beyond South Africa's borders. Exiled organizations are building networks in London, in Lusaka, in Dar es Salaam. Inside the country, activists struggle under bans and bullets. Outside, they speak freely, lobby governments, build campaigns. Whispers begin to reach Dulcie. The African National Congress is looking for disciplined, experienced organizers to strengthen its work in exile. People she trusts suggest that she should consider leaving. For her own safety, yes, but also because she could be more dangerous to the regime from beyond its tightest controls. Leaving is not a simple decision. Exile is its own kind of prison, one without a release date. To go would mean leaving family behind under a regime that punishes the relatives of activists. It would mean abandoning the familiar streets of Cape Town for anonymous pavements in foreign cities, trading the harsh clarity of open oppression for the subtle, disorienting pressures of being a stranger. She weighs these costs against a single, enormous fact. Inside South Africa, the state is profiling every move she makes, shrinking her world by the week. Outside, her voice could carry farther than any leaflet she ever passed in secret. She is almost 40. The system that classified her at birth aims to last forever. If she wants to see it fall in her lifetime, she cannot afford to waste another decade navigating its petty restrictions. The final decision feels less like a burst of courage than a slow, relentless closing of doors behind her. One more friend is detained and tortured. Another disappears into the labyrinth of the security apparatus, his name whispered in fear and never confirmed on any official list. A short, tense conversation with a contact leads to a concrete plan. A route out, papers, a timetable. For once, the deadline is hers, not the state's. She must be gone before a certain date, before new restrictions come into effect, before some faceless official decides to tighten her banning order again. The competitor has taken years from her. Now she will take herself off its chessboard and reappear where it least expects her. The day she leaves South Africa, the sky looks disarmingly ordinary. No storm clouds gather, no trumpets sound. At the airport, officials flip through her documents with uniform boredom, stamp pages that control lives with small, casual movements. She walks through metal frames that beep for others but stay silent for her. Each step away from the gate feels unreal, as if she might be called back at any moment, told that there has been a mistake, that she belongs on the ground she has just left. In her bag, she carries almost nothing: a few clothes, some letters, a heart full of faces. In her mind, she carries a promise that this is not an escape, but a change of battlefield. London greets her not with warmth, but with a damp, bone-deep cold that seems to seep up from the pavements. The streets are full of people who do not know her name, whose eyes slide past her without curiosity. Newspaper stands shout headlines about strikes, scandals, foreign crises. In one free paper on a train, she sees the word apartheid printed in large letters, not hidden in the middle of a paragraph, not whispered. Strangers casually discuss sanctions, boycotts, the morality of investing in South Africa, over coffee. The shock of this open debate hits her harder than the wind. Back home, a careless remark about politics could earn you a police file. Here, students argue loudly about her country's fate in crowded pubs, then go home untouched. It would be easy, in that anonymity, to disappear into a quiet immigrant life, to find a job, send money home, and let the struggle become something other people do. But exile has not softened the urgency pressing against her ribs. If anything, it has sharpened it. She walks into the ANC office for the first time with the same mixture of fear and determination she felt when she walked into her first classroom as a teacher. On the walls hang posters calling for freedom, photographs of demonstrations, portraits of leaders she has heard about for years. The people who greet her are tired, overworked, and completely focused. They recognize in her not just another comrade, but a rare resource. Someone who has seen the inside of the regime's prisons and yet still chooses to fight. The work begins immediately. There are letters to draft, meetings to attend, speeches to prepare for other people to deliver. She helps organize campaigns, translates the brutality of apartheid into words that foreign audiences can't ignore. She sits in tiny offices late into the night, the glow of a lamp turning stacks of paper into landscapes of possibility. Every press release, every briefing, every carefully constructed sentence is aimed like an arrow at the armor of governments that still trade with Pretoria, still call the regime an ally. Once, her blackboard was a space to rewrite the official story for 50 children at a time. Now, her classroom is the world, and the stakes have grown again. But if she has moved, so has her rival. The apartheid state is not blind to the threat posed by exiles. Its embassies are more than diplomatic posts. They are listening stations. Intelligence officers abroad read reports on people like her, track who attends which rallies, which names appear too often in newspapers. In small, smoke-filled rooms, a continent away from the town where she was born, men in suits discuss strategy. They see a pattern they don't like. Whenever someone like Dulcie steps up to a microphone in London or Amsterdam or Paris, support for sanctions grows, pressure mounts, cracks appear in their alliances. They begin to list names in a different file. Not just internal enemies, but external ones. Enemies whose bodies are now beyond the reach of their prisons, but not beyond the reach of other methods. For Dulcie, the passage of time has never been neutral. She counts the years since Sharpeville, since her arrest, since her release. Each anniversary is a reminder that her life is finite, that the system she fights still stands. She makes private bargains with herself. Perhaps she will see apartheid end before she turns 50. Perhaps she will see children in South Africa sit in classrooms where their skin does not determine their future. These are not dreams to her. They are deadlines. Whenever fatigue creeps in, whenever the scale of the task seems impossible, she thinks of the students she left behind, now grown, raising children of their own under the same laws. She does not have the luxury of slowing down. Some nights, walking back to her cramped room in a foreign city, she has the unsettling feeling that she is still being followed by the same shadow that trailed her in South Africa. Not physically, although later she will learn that this was sometimes true as well, but in the sense that the race has never really stopped. The competitor she has been up against since childhood is adapting, learning, globalizing its own operations. It is not content to fight on home turf. It, too, is looking at Europe, at the arms deals, at the diplomats, at the newspapers. It, too, understands that the battle for South Africa's future is being decided, in part, in places like London and Paris. So when, some years into her exile, a quiet proposal is made that she take on a new role, representing the ANC in a European country, where the apartheid regime is building lucrative relationships and secret deals, she doesn't hesitate for long. It is another change of battlefield, another narrowing of the gap between her and the invisible rival that has been trying to silence her since that first knock on her door. She knows, without being told, that the closer she gets to the money and weapons propping up apartheid, the more dangerous her work will become. She also knows something else. Time is running out. For the regime, for her, for the generation waiting back home. And if there is one thing Dulcie September has learned, it is that when the clock is ticking, she does not step back. She steps forward. In detective stories, the moment the investigator gets too close to the truth, someone finally protects them. Phones are tapped, a bodyguard appears, the threat is acknowledged. In Dulcie September's life, the opposite happens. The closer she gets to the heart of apartheid's secret deals, the emptier the space around her becomes. The room grows quieter. Doors that were open yesterday are suddenly under renovation. People who used to call every week begin to answer in cautious whispers. And still, the clock keeps ticking, louder and louder, counting down to a deadline only her enemy truly understands. Her new battlefield is Paris. From the air, the city looks like a map, drawn in careful lines. The river like a vein. The streets like the ribs of a living thing. On the ground, it smells of exhaust, bread, cigarette smoke, and cold rain. Tourists crane their necks at monuments. Couples argue softly in the metro. Students rush with books under their arms, complaining about exams, not police raids. It feels at first like a different planet from the Cape Town she left behind. The office she walks into is almost comically modest. The ANC mission in Paris is not a grand embassy. It is a cramped set of rooms in a worn building with squeaky stairs and paint that gives up in the corners. The furniture looks like it has been rescued from 3 different lives. The phone is old. The heater works when it feels like it. But on the wall hangs a small printed sign that makes her chest tighten. African National Congress, representative for France, Switzerland, and Luxembourg. Underneath, in careful letters, her own name. Across the city, behind high walls and polished windows, stands the embassy of the apartheid regime. Their flag flutters on an immaculate pole. Their staff move in official cars. They throw receptions with good wine and careful invitations. Every day, people in suits walk through those doors to discuss trade, strategy, weapons, energy. She knows this because she spends her first weeks in Paris reading everything she can find. Press releases, trade journals, government records. She is a teacher again, but her subject is power, and her competitor sits across the river, well-financed and well-armed. Very quickly, a pattern emerges from the paperwork. France likes to call itself the land of human rights. But French companies are doing lucrative business with Pretoria. Arms manufacturers ship equipment that helps enforce the very system she was imprisoned for resisting. Engineers help build the Coburg nuclear power station, designed under the pretext of electricity but shadowed by the possibility of nuclear weapons. Banks move money that keeps the regime's economy alive. It is just business, officials say, when they say anything at all. To Dulcie, staring down at lists of contracts and delivery dates, it does not look like just business. It looks like a race. If she cannot expose these deals quickly enough, they will harden into fact. Once the weapons are delivered, they cannot be undispatched. Once the nuclear reactors are built, they cannot be unbuilt. Each contract has a timeline, a schedule of payments, a final delivery date. The state she fights is working to its own calendar. She decides, quietly, that she will work to one of her own. In 5 years, she tells herself, the balance must begin to tip. 5 years to turn French public opinion, to embarrass ministers, to force companies into the light. 5 years before she turns 50, before a whole new generation back home grows up under the same laws. Her days fill up immediately. She travels constantly. Lyon 1 week, Geneva the next, a dusty hall in a small industrial town on a Thursday night. She speaks in trade union offices, where the air smells of coffee and old posters, in church halls, where folding chairs scrape the floor, in student auditoriums, where the sound system crackles but still works. She shows photographs of Sharpeville, of children facing police lines, of rows of men in overalls standing behind prison fences. She tells her own story only when necessary, and then in simple, steady sentences. She is not there to impress them with her suffering. She is there to recruit them into a fight. The teacher in her has never been sharper. She breaks apartheid down into things people can feel. The weight of a passbook in a pocket, the ache of a back bent over someone else's land, the humiliation of a whites-only sign on a beach filled with sun. She explains how each bullet fired in a South African township has a serial number that can be traced back to a factory, sometimes to a city only a few hours away by train. She connects the distant to the immediate, the abstract to the concrete. She looks at a room full of long coats and winter scarves and sees, behind their questions, the possibility of action. There are victories, and she counts them carefully, like small stones set against a much heavier weight. A city council votes to boycott South African products. A trade union announces it will refuse to unload cargo from ships known to carry goods from the regime. A church network commits to regular collections for families of political prisoners. Each decision is, on paper, tiny. In her mind, she imagines them as cracks in concrete, thin at first, but spreading with every frost. But with every public success comes a private twist. Behind closed doors, she meets polite officials who listen with grave expressions and then slide into phrases that taste like cold oil. We understand your concerns, Madame September, but we must consider our national interests. Our company cannot discriminate between clients based on politics. Surely dialogue with Pretoria is preferable to isolation. They treat apartheid as an unfortunate habit, not a crime. They speak of stability, contracts, energy needs. The word they never use is profit. But she hears it anyway, humming beneath every sentence like an electrical current. She realizes, with a jolt that is almost physical, that she is not only fighting the rulers of South Africa, she is fighting the comfort of Europe. So she changes gear. The speeches continue, but another layer of work begins, quieter and more dangerous. She cultivates sources, a clerk in a ministry who slides her a document on his lunch break and walks away without looking back. A technician who whispers the name of a company with a suspiciously regular shipping schedule to Cape Town. An activist who has memorized the contents of a file she was not allowed to copy. At night, in the ANC office, Dulcie spreads these fragments out on her desk like pieces of a puzzle. Company names, contract numbers, obscure acronyms, port codes. She circles them with a pen, draws lines, makes connections. A French electronics manufacturer here, a South African security agency there, a shipment marked as agricultural equipment that docks repeatedly in a harbor with no fields for miles. A nuclear cooperation agreement that stays just within the letter of the law while stepping completely outside its spirit. The deeper she digs, the clearer it becomes. Apartheid is not just being tolerated by foreign partners, it is being actively fed. That is when the feeling begins. Late at night, leaving the office alone, she notices a car parked on the corner with its engine off. The same model, the same dent near the bumper. A man across the street seems to be reading a newspaper in the rain, but the pages never turn. The phone rings, and when she answers, there is only breathing, then a click. Once, she returns to the office in the morning and finds the door still locked, the windows unbroken, and yet the papers on her desk are not where she left them. A drawer she knows she shut tightly slides open too easily. Nothing is missing. Everything has been touched. The competitor has extended the race course into Paris. She reports the incidents to the French police, her voice measured, her description precise. A detective takes notes, nods, promises to look into it. Days pass. Nothing happens. No follow-up call, no increased patrols, no serious questions. Madame September, one officer says with the tired patience used on nervous children, Paris is a big city. People watch each other. You must not worry so much. She leaves the station with her hands cold and her jaw tight. Back in Cape Town, the state watched her openly, brutally. Here, the surveillance hides behind shrugs and paperwork. Even within the movement, the pressure has its own shape. Some comrades worry that her relentless focus on arms deals and nuclear contracts is too provocative. We are guests in this country, one colleague reminds her. We must not become a problem for the government. We need their support on sanctions. Another suggests that she should prioritize building solidarity rather than digging into technical matters like weapons and energy. She hears the unspoken message, do not embarrass powerful friends. Do not point at the dirt under their fingernails while you are asking for their handshake. The competitor seems to be gaining not just in embassies and boardrooms, but in the minds of those who should be on her side. Then the news begins to filter in, each item like a coded warning. A bomb in Mozambique kills the scholar and activist Ruth first when she opens a parcel at her desk. An ANC representative in another country is gunned down outside his home. A car explodes in a quiet street, sending shards of glass across playgrounds and kitchen tables. The apartheid state is no longer content with imprisoning opponents at home. It is crossing borders with parcels and assassins, reaching into the lives of exiles who thought distance might offer a margin of safety. When Dulcie hears these reports, she feels a chill that is half fear, half recognition. She knows the logic. The regime is hunting messengers. Every killing is designed to collect interest on time. Not just the years cut short for the victim, but the hours of fear consumed by everyone who hears about it. It is a brutal form of schedule management. You are not just silenced. You become a warning bell for others. She writes home, letters that are careful in what they spell out, but frank in what they imply. If anything happens to me, she tells a relative over one rare, crackling phone call, remember that it was not because I was careless, it was because they do not like people who ask the wrong questions. She does not say aloud that she feels a clock ticking more loudly now, that in the small hours she wonders whether she has 3 years, or 5, or only months before someone decides she has seen too much. And yet the work does not slow. If anything, it accelerates. By the mid-1980s, international sanctions are no longer a radical dream. They are being debated in parliaments, discussed in boardrooms, shouted for in the streets. In France, the discussion is messy, full of contradictions. One day, a minister makes a strong speech against apartheid. The next, another approves an export license for equipment that will end up in South African ports. To many observers, this looks like confusion. To Dulcie, it looks like an opening. Confusion means friction. Friction can be turned into heat. She helps plan campaigns that hit where it hurts. Letters to shareholders of companies profiting from apartheid, boycotts that embarrass, fashion brands using South African gold, petitions that force questions in Parliament about specific arms deliveries. She travels to Switzerland to warn bankers that their secrecy is sheltering blood money, to Luxembourg to speak in rooms where the curtains are too thick and the carpets too soft. Each time she stands up, the competitor watches, takes notes, adjusts. The strain shows in small ways, the shadows under her eyes, the cough that lingers after every winter, the way she sometimes rubs her temples after a long meeting, as if trying to push back a headache made of other people's indifference. But there is also something else, something harder that has grown in her since prison. A refusal to be talked out of urgency. When someone tells her, "These things take time," she answers quietly, "Time is the one thing people in the townships do not have." Then comes a twist that hardens her resolve further. Through a chain of contacts that now stretches across borders and languages, she receives information that suggests the relationship between French interests and the apartheid state is even deeper than she imagined. Not just open contracts, not just visible nuclear cooperation, but deals in the shadows, middlemen, shell companies, shipments routed through other countries, weapon systems dressed up as civilian equipment. The numbers attached to these deals are staggering. Figures that, if spent differently, could build hospitals, schools, entire districts. She looks at the pages laid out on her desk, feels the chill of recognition again. If she can prove even a fraction of this, if she can push it into the light before the contracts are fulfilled, the political cost for those involved could be enormous. That is the moment when the race stops being abstract. She is no longer just trying to change opinions over years. She is trying to outrun specific containers, specific signatures, specific dates printed in ink. Her own deadline sharpens. She needs to make these revelations land within months, not years, before the next arms shipment leaves port, before a particular nuclear agreement is quietly renewed, before some cautious politician signs a paper that locks in complicity for another decade. She rearranges her calendar, cancels lighter engagements, focuses on the pressure points. The walls of the office grow more crowded with charts, lists, phone numbers, shipping routes, and around her, the net tightens. There are more break-ins now, always precise, always surgical. Once, the files that matter most are left exactly where they were. But the file that held her address book has been thumbed through, each page slightly more worn. Another time, a neighbor mentions in passing that two men in suits were asking which evenings she usually returned home. She begins to vary her routes, switch metro lines at the last minute, glance into the faces of those who seem too interested. When she reports all this to the authorities again, the responses are a little less patient, a little more curt. "Without concrete evidence, madame, there is not much we can do. Perhaps you should take more personal precautions. You must understand, there are many political groups in Paris. We cannot protect everyone." The message is clear. The clock is still ticking, but she will not be given extra time. Even some within the movement, unnerved by the pattern of attacks on ANC representatives abroad, quietly urge her to slow down. "Be careful with the arms issue," one senior figure warns. "These are dangerous people. We cannot fight everyone at once." She understands the fear. She shares it, but she also knows that every delay, every softened statement, every postponed press conference is a small gift of time to the very system they have all sworn to defeat. So she does something that terrifies the competitor more than silence or retreat. She keeps going. By early 1988, her diary is a battlefield of its own. Names of journalists who have finally agreed to listen. Dates of upcoming debates in the French Parliament. Meetings with members of peace groups who want to broaden their campaigns. In the margins, she scribbles reminders to write to families back home, to send news to former students if she can find their addresses. There is almost no white space left. Her life has become a series of appointments with urgency. The threats become more explicit. Anonymous letters appear, repeating the same phrases her interrogators once used. "We know where you live. You have been warned." On the phone, a voice in Afrikaans tells her calmly that she will not live to see a free South Africa. She listens, then hangs up, her hand steady, but her heart hammering. The competitor is announcing that it, too, has set a deadline. She begins quietly to put her own house in order. She makes sure that key documents are duplicated and stored in more than one place, that colleagues know the outlines of what she has discovered, that contacts will not be lost if she is suddenly unreachable. She writes more letters home, some of them half practical, half farewell, without ever using the word. She does not stop working. If anything, the knowledge that time may be shorter than she hoped sharpens her sentences, makes her speeches even more precise. Every word must carry more weight, because there may be fewer of them left. On the night before the end, she cannot see. Paris looks almost gentle. Rain has washed the streets clean. In the window of her small apartment, the reflection of the city's lights trembles like a second, upside-down world. She checks her notes for the next day. A meeting at the office first thing in the morning. Calls to journalists about a new angle. On French arms exports. Preparation for an upcoming speaking tour that could push the pressure higher still. She straightens the stack of files on her table automatically, the way a teacher tidies worksheets before a lesson. She allows herself, for a moment, to think ahead, to a South Africa where children walk into classrooms without being told they are lesser, to a day when the word apartheid is something people read about in history books, not on the front pages of newspapers. She is 52 years old. She does not know if she will live to see that future, but she knows, with a clarity that cuts through the tiredness, that if she stops now, the competitor wins by default. Early the next morning, the city is still wiping sleep from its eyes when she leaves her building. The air has that thin, cold edge that makes breath visible. She carries her bag over one shoulder, the same bag that has held so many documents, so many petitions and speeches, now only mildly heavy. The street is ordinary, almost dull. A baker lifting a shutter, a cyclist coasting past, a car engine turning over somewhere out of sight. She walks towards the ANC office at 4 Rue des Petites Écuries, her mind already on the papers she will spread out on the desk, the calls she must make before noon, the race she is still absolutely determined to run faster than the system that has chased her since childhood. The building comes into view, familiar now, its doorway just a few steps ahead. She does not know that someone is waiting, watching the clock as carefully as she does, his own deadline marked in bullets instead of appointments. 10 seconds, that is all it takes to turn 52 years of stubborn survival into a stain on a tiled floor. He is already inside, up the stairs, in the narrow corridor that leads to the ANC office. He has checked his watch 3 times. He knows her routine. She is almost always on time. The building smells of dust and old paint. Somewhere a radio plays faintly behind a closed door, a French pop song, bubbling obliviously through the walls. Her footsteps echo up from the entrance. For the neighbors, the day is starting like any other. A woman counts coins into a child's hand for the bakery. A man locks his mailbox. On the street, someone curses at a stalled car. Ordinary sounds, ordinary timing. No one notices the smallest shift. A door that should be shut is slightly ajar. A stranger's hand resting calmly in a coat pocket. She pushes the door open. The same gesture she has made hundreds of times. The gesture that has always meant another day to work. The first shot cracks the air like a misplaced firework. The second, third, fourth, fifth come so fast they almost merge into one. The gun is held close to her head, the bullets entering at such an angle that the forensic reports will later talk about execution, style, and professional technique. For her, there is barely time to turn, barely time for the body to send a final surge of adrenaline through veins that have carried so much fight. 52 years of defiance end in a hallway that smells of old paper and damp plaster. On the street outside, the world flinches. A neighbor opens his door and freezes. "Madame? Madame Dulcie?" he calls, his voice already wrong, already higher than usual. There is no answer. He takes 2 steps forward and sees the body on the tiles, the bag fallen open, papers scattered like a small explosion of white. He does not know that in those papers are phone numbers, lists of dates, outlines of the next speeches she was going to give. He does not know that one of them contains a name that, if connected to another document, would have drawn a line between French interests and South African weapons. He knows only what any person would know, that life and death can exist in the same hallway, separated by less than a second. Within minutes, the building fills with people. A doctor from a nearby practice arrives first, then the police, then colleagues who were expecting her in the office and now stand. Outside, held back by uniformed arms, the street narrows into a tunnel of sirens and questions. Someone throws a sheet over her body, but blood seeps through almost immediately. That deep, dark red that never looks like it does in films. The competitor is out of sight, already fading into the city. A car door closes somewhere around the corner. An engine starts, a vehicle disappears into the morning traffic. For the man who pulled the trigger, the operation is measured not in horror, but in efficiency. Time in, time out, target down. On paper, it looks like the competitor has finally won the race. The first police statements call it a brutal murder. They mention her role as a political representative. They promise a full investigation. But in the quiet offices, where paper is moved from one pile to another, a different process begins. Categorization. Is it terrorism? Is it a personal attack? Is it linked to foreign intelligence services? Each label carries its own procedures, its own speed. In those same first hours, another clock starts ticking. The clock that governs how long witnesses remember clearly, how fast a security camera tape is recycled, how quickly a weapon can be dismantled, wiped, thrown into a river. In Paris, newsrooms scramble. ANC representative shot in French capital, the headlines say. The anchormen speak of her as Miss September, stumble over the pronunciation of her name, pull out file photos where she looks serious, composed, alive. Some mention that she had reported threats, that she believed she was being watched, that she had warned of the danger. The camera cuts to the doorway of 4 Rue des Petites Écuries, now draped in police tape. In Cape Town, in Athlone, in the streets where she once organized meetings and dodged police vans, people hear the news in fragments. A cousin gets a phone call. A neighbor listens to a foreign radio station. The crackle of the signal fighting the distance. Someone says, "Not Dulcie. It cannot be Dulcie. She already paid with years in prison. Surely that is enough." The competitor believes there is such a thing as enough. Enough fear to silence, enough pain to deter, enough bullets to erase a name. In the days that follow, those bullets are documented with scientific coldness. The distance, the trajectory, the caliber. The case file grows, a stack of papers thicker than the bundle she carried in her bag that morning. Witness statements are taken. Composite sketches are drawn. The phrase "professional job" appears again and again in confidential notes, followed quickly by the phrase "no immediate leads." Then comes the first twist. Instead of disappearing into a small paragraph on page 7, her death explodes across front pages, posters, banners. Photographs of Dulcie September standing at podiums are suddenly everywhere. Students who never heard her speak are holding her name on cardboard signs. A march winds through Paris with her portrait at its head. Her calm gaze now an accusation aimed at government buildings and corporate headquarters. In the churches and union halls where she once explained apartheid with a teacher's patience, people now stand in silence for her. Priests read her words from the pulpit. Union leaders remind their members that she had visited their offices not as a celebrity, but as a comrade, asking them to take risks. The girl from Athlone, who once struggled to be heard in her own classroom, has become impossible to ignore in a foreign capital. Her funeral in Paris is both intimate and political. The coffin is draped in the colors of the African National Congress. Songs in languages most Parisians do not speak rise and fall under the high arches of the church. Representatives from other liberation movements come, as do a few careful officials who choose their seats as cautiously as they choose their words. Outside, in the cold light, journalists jostle. She was killed because she stood against apartheid, one ANC speaker says, his voice steady, but make no mistake. She was also killed because she stood in the path of profitable deals. The camera lingers on the phrase, profitable deals. For those who knew what she had been working on in her last months, it is not a metaphor. Back in South Africa, the apartheid government issues a bland statement of regret, denies involvement, and then turns to more pressing matters like crushing protests and managing international opinion. In some cramped office in Pretoria, a report from Paris lands on a desk. The language is dry, but the result is simple. The operation succeeded. The messenger has been removed. They underestimate the echo. If the competitor thought that killing her would slow the campaign in France, the next months deliver a different result. Activists who had once hesitated are now galvanized by anger. Boycott committees that were struggling to fill their meeting rooms now overflow. Her name becomes shorthand for every uncomfortable question European governments would prefer not to be asked about their ties to Pretoria. Members of Parliament in France stand up to demand answers not just about the murder, but about what Dulcie had been investigating. Why, one of them asks, holding up a copy of a report she had helped compile, was this woman considered such a threat that someone crossed continents to silence her? The question hangs in the chamber, heavy as a verdict. No minister gives a satisfying answer. The investigation into her death, meanwhile, begins to slow. Detectives are reassigned. The phrase "lack of resources" is heard. Promising leads go cold. There is talk of possible local extremists, of random violence, of competing political factions. Anything, it seems, but a clear line drawn between a state that had a documented habit of killing its opponents abroad and a woman who had received threats that matched that pattern almost point for point. Time is working for someone else now. Witnesses move away. Memories blur. Paper trails that might have linked French intermediaries to South African security services are shredded, archived, or hidden under stamps that read classified and defense secret. In this second race, the competitor sets the rules. Drag it out, complicate it, wait until those who care most are tired, old, or dead. But if Dulcie is no longer there to push, others step into the lane she cleared. Journalists start digging, some of them young enough that they were in school when she was shot. They read her notes, retrace her trips, talk to the people who remember her knocking on their doors with questions about contracts and shipments. They discover that around the time of her killing, significant French arms deals with South Africa were under discussion, sometimes routed through third countries, sometimes disguised as civilian equipment. They print words like suspicious coincidence and possible motive. For her family, the fight becomes more personal and more painful. Sisters and cousins who once worried about her safety now carry her photograph into courtrooms and committee hearings. They ask not just who fired the gun, but who ordered it, who looked the other way, who decided that a woman who had survived detention and torture in South Africa would not be allowed to live out her days in a modest Paris apartment. Years turn into decades. Apartheid itself falls. Nelson Mandela walks out of prison in 1990, raising a fist to a world that has been changed in part by people like Dulcie, who paid for that change in advance. In 1994, South Africa holds its first democratic elections. The lines of voters stretch for kilometers, older women leaning on walking sticks, young men in borrowed shirts. Somewhere in those lines are former students of Dulcie's, men and women who remember her as the teacher who taught them to say no. In a system that demanded yes, her name is spoken at some of the victory rallies, tucked between those of other martyrs and leaders. Streets in the new South Africa are renamed in her honor. A school adopts her name, children repeating it every morning as they answer the register, unaware that they are speaking the syllables of a woman who once taught children in classrooms filled with fear. In the cinematic version of history, this is where the screen would fade to black. The story closed with the fall of the system she fought, but real life does not come with such tidy endings. In France, the case file on her murder gathers dust, then suddenly is reopened. A new judge takes an interest. Perhaps it is the weight of time. Perhaps it is a shift in political winds. Perhaps it is simply that some people cannot stand unsolved questions. Witnesses are sought again. Old evidence is re-examined. Those around her feel a flicker of the old urgency. Maybe, they think, the schedule of truth has not been entirely cancelled. Maybe it has only been postponed. There is a painful twist in this late act. Some of the documents that might have shed light on her killing are found to have disappeared. Others are still locked away behind state secrecy orders. Files that she herself would have read with a teacher's careful attention are now being used to keep the full story of her death in the dark. The same mechanisms that once smoothed the path for arms shipments to apartheid South Africa are now smoothing over the uncomfortable question of who helped protect the killer's trail. Again, time is used as a weapon. Not the sharp, immediate time of bullets, but the slow, grinding time of bureaucracy. Yet even this does not erase her. In Cape Town, young activists who were not born when she died paint her face on walls. The mural shows her with a book in one hand and a microphone in the other, the two tools that defined her life. In Paris, a plaque is unveiled near the place where she was shot. People pass it every day on their way to work, some stopping to read the name, some hurrying past. That is how memory works. Visible, available, but always at risk of being overlooked unless someone points and says, "Look, this matters." Teachers tell her story in classrooms, drawing the arc from the girl who refused to accept a restricted education, to the woman who chose prison over silence, to the representative who died trying to connect arms contracts in Europe to deaths in South African townships. In university lectures, her name appears in slides about transnational activism, about how local courage can disrupt global systems of profit and oppression. For those who knew her personally, the legacy is quieter, more intimate. A former fellow prisoner remembers how she would share her food with others during the worst days. A colleague from Paris recalls the way she straightened the chairs before every meeting, insisting on order even when chaos would have been understandable. A family member keeps one of her letters in a box, the paper yellowing at the edges, the ink still sharp. In it, Dulcie writes, "Time is not ours to control, But what we do with it is, the competitor is still out there, in different clothes, with different slogans. It appears in new forms of exploitation, in governments that trade human rights for contracts, in companies that choose profit over conscience. It still believes in the power of delay, of distraction, of letting files lie unopened until interest fades. It still gambles that if it can outlast those who oppose it, it will win by default. But there is a flaw in that strategy, one that her life and death both expose. You can kill a person. You can stall an investigation. You can lock away documents for 30, 40, 50 years. What you cannot easily do is erase the example of someone who measured her own time not by comfort, but by urgency. Her decisions linger as a kind of inconvenient evidence that it is possible to put justice ahead of safety, that it is possible to look at a comfortable life in exile and still choose to provoke dangerous questions. Her story does not close when the gunshots stop echoing in that Paris hallway. It continues in every campaign that draws a line between distant contracts and local suffering, in every young activist who looks at a powerful state and thinks they are not invincible. It continues each time someone refuses to be told to wait, when waiting only benefits those already in power. And now, in this moment, it continues in you. You are hearing her name, perhaps for the first time, in a world where apartheid has officially ended, but its shadows still stretch. Across economies and borders, you live with your own clocks, deadlines, appointments, the tiny numbers in the corner of your screen. Somewhere between those seconds, there is space to remember that a woman once looked at a system built on deadlines of oppression and decided to run faster, to speak louder, to ask riskier questions. The competitor is still confident it can outlast that memory. The only real question, the one her life now quietly throws at anyone who hears it, is brutally simple. When the clock runs on injustice and on your own fear at the same time, which one do you let win?